Oh, here she is.
Oh, perfect. Okay, we're back from closed session at 6:09 if anybody cares. Mr. Eno, will you please report out?
Thank you, Mayor. The Emeryville City Council and the Mesa Board met in closed session on the items listed on the closed session agenda. Regarding item 5.1.1, direction was given. Regarding item 6.1.1, on a motion by Member Bowders, seconded by the Mayor, on a 5-0 vote, the council decided to not pursue litigation. And that is the conclusion of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we are done with the special closed session meeting, and I will adjourn this meeting. We're back in, looks like 6 minutes to me.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. make any assumptions. Figured you might be out getting a haircut or something.
Last Friday, check.
Are you ready for me to stop making a fool of myself?
Let me just check with Dave.
Next
You've
minute.
given me the
haircut
thumbs
is
up.
you,
We're-
Mr. Mayor.
We're ready
I'm
to
not
go.
taking one until we're out. So I'm going to do it. All right. It is 6:15 on November 17th, 2020. I call this special study session meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bouders,
Here.
Councilmember Donahue,
Here.
Councilmember Medina,
Here.
Vice Mayor Martinez,
Here.
and Mayor Pats.
Here, can I have a motion and a second for the approval of the final agenda?
I move approval.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bouders,
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue,
Aye.
Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez,
Aye.
and Mayor Pats.
Aye. Do we have any public comment for the study session?
Or was there any ex parte communications?
Oh, did I skip ex parte? Sorry, ex parte and then public comment. Any ex parte? Just going ahead because I knew it was a no. Now, do we have any public comment?
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or online forms for public comment.
Perfect. With that, I will move into the study session, item 6.1. Is Valerie presenting for us?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am.
Welcome.
Thank you. Barry, I'm sorry, can you go to the first slide?
Sorry about that. How's that?
Perfect, thank you. Well, welcome City Council members and Mayor Pats. My name is Valerie Bernardo. I'm with the Community Development Department and the Economic Development and Housing Division. And today I'm going to be talking with you guys about a affordable housing financing tool that potentially the city may look to partnership with in order to create additional affordable housing. I do have somebody who's going to join us at the end of my presentation. His name is Jordan Moss, and he's with the Catalyst Housing Group. But with that, I'll go ahead and start with the presentation. Next slide, please. So what is middle income housing? There are always a variety of terms that are used in affordable housing, and they have a lot of different meanings, not only locally, but across the country. Middle income housing is traditionally thought of as housing for those that are between 60 and 140% of AMI. And to give you an example of who we're talking about, you're thinking about your teachers, government employees, medical and dental assistants, social workers, public safety personnel. They all represent those who typically make between 60 and 140% of AMI. In the city's 2015 to 2023 housing element, Policy H2-2 states that we are to support new housing opportunities for extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income households. However, there are two issues that prevent us from really developing housing for those between that 60 and 140% of AMI group. The first problem is lack of resources. The structure of state and federal funding sources, as well as the state's density bonus law, almost exclusively target lower income households at 0 to 60% of AMI, making it extremely difficult to develop housing for middle income households, especially in high cost areas as we have here in the Bay Area. The second reason is market forces. Market rate developers are going to continue to develop market rate housing, which is often out of reach for low and moderate income households. Affordable housing developers, of course, are developing primarily very low income housing based off of the funding sources that are available. So what happens? We end up squeezing middle income households out of the housing market. Next slide, please. These issues or problems are also evident when you even look at our progress towards our regional housing needs assessment. For 2015 to 2019, we built or had permits pulled for 581 units out of the 1,498. But when you look at the chart, you can see what I have circled in red, those at low and moderate, that's where we've created the least amount of production. So again, lack of resources, market conditions just make it extremely hard for us to build and incentivize housing at those income levels. Next slide, please. It is because of those issues why we need a program such as the CalCHA, or the California Community Housing Agency, and I'll probably continue to refer to it as CalCHA just for brevity. The California CalCHA is a public entity that was formed in Kings County and with the Housing Authority of Kings County, and that was done in 2019 of January. The public entity was formed by the county and the Housing Authority as a joint powers authority. CalCHA is governed by its board, which consists of elected officials from Kings County, also known as the Kings County Board of Supervisors. Additional communities and cities can become non-charter members. And to provide you with a little bit of information on who some of those additional non-charter members are, especially here in the Bay Area, we have Fairfield, Menlo Park, Napa, Mountain View, Livermore, Hayward, Dublin, Walnut Creek, the County of Marin. And then of course, you also could have a housing authority such as the Glendale Housing Authority. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So what exactly is it that CalCHA does? So it issues governmental purpose tax exempt bonds to finance the acquisition of market rate multifamily housing. And that housing can be vacant entitled sites that need new construction or existing occupied sites with or without a need for rehabilitation. Properties that are acquired are then converted to income and rent restricted rental properties. The bonds that are issued are limited obligations of CalCHA and are not obligations of the additional members. So if the city opts to become an additional member, we do not have to carry that obligation on our books. The bonds are paid solely out of the revenues and receipts that are derived from the project being financed. So there's no other liability that would be on the responsibility of the city. CalCHA is the owner of the property, and they contract out their general oversight and compliance. As I mentioned before, Jordan Moss will be joining us shortly. He's with Catalyst Housing Group, and they are the contracted asset management entity. Additionally, they have also contracted with 2 property management companies, Greystar and FPI. The third thing that CalCHA does is it provides a public benefit to those additional member cities. Next slide, please. There are 4 projects that have been acquired over the past year and a half since CalCHA's creation. You'll see the first one was in Santa Rosa, Annandale Apartments. That was acquired in April of 2019. The last property acquired is down on the far right, the Arbors. That one was acquired in August of 2020. The majority of the properties that they do seek to acquire are A-class properties. However, the Arbors property was a slightly different project in which this project was losing its affordability because the restrictions had expired. So they actually went into this deal not only to acquire it and retain the affordability at the property, but also to provide some much needed renovation to the property. Next slide, please. So what's the public benefit that the city would receive? I really look at it as 2 different categories. The first one is we would have a regulatory agreement that's recorded against any property that's acquired. That regulatory agreement would restrict the occupancy of those units to where at least 1/3 of the units had to be occupied by low-income individuals, 1/3 of the units had to be occupied by median-income individuals, and no more than 1/3 of the units would be occupied by moderate-income households. Additionally, when they acquire the property, they also have a rent protection built into the regulatory agreement in which rents are not increased more than 4% of whatever the tenant's current rent is, or whatever the applicable rent limit is for the program. Lastly, and one of the most important things, is that there is a displacement program also built into this initiative. They have no intention of displacing any of the existing residents at the property. If it just so happens that they acquire a property where residents live at that property who do not meet the income requirements, those residents are allowed to continue to live at that property. And then upon their own choice, they can leave whenever they're ready. But there would be no displacement of any of the existing residents. The second public benefit that the city receives is also surplus project revenue. The city would be obligated to receive any and all surplus cash flow that is generated by the project once the bonds are paid off on a yearly basis. Or if the property is sold, those proceeds of the sale would also go directly to the city. Next slide, please. So what does it take for the city to participate in the CalCHA program? There are 4 things. The first one is the city would have to agree to enter into the JPA agreement as an additional member. Secondly, we would have to approve the issuance of tax-exempt bonds on whatever property was to be acquired through the CalCHA financing. That would happen in consultation with the city manager, EDH staff, and of course the city attorney. Thirdly, we'd have to execute an option to purchase agreement on that property. If the city manager determines that the property is not a property that the city would be interested in, they would not move forward on executing that purchase option agreement, and therefore the bonds would not be issued on that property. So the city does have a lot of authority in determining which properties would be participating in this program. And then fourth, we would have to agree to accept any surplus cash or sales proceeds that are generated by the property to ensure that its use is a public benefit. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about that purchase option agreement. The purchase option agreement is required to be executed prior to the acquisition of that property and the issuance of the bonds. It would be set to an amount that would be equal to the outstanding balance of the bonds plus any customary transactional cost. So it would say in that option agreement that if the city so chooses to acquire the property, we would only be required to acquire it for whatever the outstanding balance of the bonds are. Additionally, the city may acquire the property and decide to either assign its interest to another entity, such as a nonprofit housing developer. The city so chooses not to be the owner of housing and wants to really utilize a local nonprofit, it has that ability to do that during that purchase option period. Or the city can opt to take no action. So we can buy it, we can transfer our interest to a nonprofit, or we can decide that we don't want to do anything on the property. If that happens, in the event that there is surplus cash flow after the period of the bonds, that the city will receive those annual payments. If at the end of the life of the bond, if the city decides not to purchase the property or assign it to another developer, then CalCHA will sell the property and all the proceeds will go directly to the city. So if the city goes dark and doesn't do anything for 30 years, in 30 years when the bonds are paid off, CalCHA will sell the property and then the city will receive all the revenue that comes from the sale of this property, even without doing anything. Next slide, please. So what's the fiscal impact to the city? Well, I think it's important to identify that there's no financial expenditures, liabilities, or obligations that are created by participating in this program. The city, however, will have to forego the collection of property taxes for those properties that are acquired. CalCHA is a public authority, so they are eligible for 100% property tax exemption. A good example that we're looking at, and of course this is not a perfect science, but if you had a 300-unit apartment complex here in Emeryville, as an example, on average, maybe they're paying about $300,000 annually in property taxes. The city would forego receiving those payments on an annual basis. In year 15 to 30, the city again can acquire the property. And if they choose to do so, they would have to acquire it for whatever the outstanding debt is. So that's a potential fiscal impact if the city so chooses to take that action. The other option is if the city can acquire the property for minimal transaction fees, let's say if the bonds were paid off early, then we would just be responsible for those transactional costs. After the bonds are paid off, again, the city would receive that surplus cash flow on an annual basis, and the city would be eligible to receive whatever one-time proceeds are generated from the sale of that property. Next slide, please. So what are a couple of other things to know? The CalCHA program, in working with Catalyst, one of the benefits is that it allows transactions to close extremely quickly. It's a very volatile market, and most property owners really want to close transactions quickly. The way they've set this program up, it does allow them to react very quickly and move with the fluidity of the market. The other thing that's important to know is that, of course, they can acquire vacant land in which new construction would be developed, or existing properties. And those properties can or cannot have any kind of rehabilitation need. There is that anti-displacement policy, which is really good to make sure that none of our residents are ever displaced if a property is acquired. There is an impact to the RHNA. So one of the things we did talk about was the fact that there is a need for low and moderate income housing, as evidenced in our RHNA. Currently, under the RHNA, we can only count those projects under which new permits are issued. So that's the development of new units. Any property that is acquired utilizing this model that is already existing, we unfortunately would not be able to count it towards our RHNA. However, that does not stop us from generating and creating additional affordable housing in the city. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Also, this was reviewed before the Housing Committee, and the Housing Committee did vote unanimously to recommend that the City Council participate in the CalCHA program. The last thing I wanted to point out is there are some rent and income limit differences I just want you to be aware of. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll show those to you. So the CalCHA program currently uses the tax credit income limits and rent limits. Those rent and income limits are slightly different than what's published by the city or by HCD. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware. The top charts, both in purple, are showing what the income limit is under tax credit and what the rent limits are under the tax credit program, which would be what would be utilized for this program. The bottom charts in blue are what the city adopts and what the city adopted last July. So you will notice there are some slight differences. Those differences really come from the way that the multifamily tax subsidy projects, how they have there's a hold harmless policy that was enacted over a decade ago. And that's why there's this discrepancy between these two affordable housing programs as to what the income and rent limits are. But I did want to make sure that everybody was clear that participation in this program would mean that we would have some properties that would operate it with different requirements than what we would have with all of our other properties. It is also important to know that if they're acquiring a property that already has a regulatory agreement recorded against it, they are still required to comply with the one that's most restrictive. So if there was an ability of acquiring a property that the city already had recorded an agreement with, they would still be required to comply with the lower income and rent limits that the city has adopted and is in our regulatory agreement. Next slide, please. So I have 3 sets of questions for consideration this evening. I'm going to run through the questions, and then I did want to turn it over to Jordan so he can provide some information, and then we can bring this back up and go through them. The first question is, does the City Council have any feedback regarding the CalCHA financing model? Second question is, does the City Council want to place any special conditions or limitations on the transactions it will authorize the city manager to enact under the CalCHA program? I did provide a couple of examples that I've seen out there. So the first one is, do we want to allow them to utilize this tool for new construction sites and existing sites, or just one or the other? Do we want to create a maximum number of properties that are allowed to be acquired using this financing model within a designated time frame? So no more than 1 property a year, or no more than 5 properties every 5 years, something of that range. Do we want to require them to conduct a capital or physical needs assessment on any existing property that's going to be acquired and to determine what those rehabilitation needs are and how they're going to recommend undertaking them? Next slide, please. The third question for consideration is, I'm sorry, it does say the Housing Committee, but does City Council want to place any specific deal terms or requirements on the types of properties that can be acquired? such as, does the city want to provide the selection or replacement of the property management company from those that are on the Couch's property managers list? Does the city want to be able to review any audited project financial records as needed? Does the city want to be able to review annual compliance reports as requested? And then lastly, does the city want to review any capital or physical need assessments and propose rehabilitation plans before they move forward with any acquisitions? Next slide. So those are the three questions that I have for you. I want to say thank you again. But if I would like to go ahead and introduce Jordan Moss. He's with Catalyst Housing Group, and he's going to give you a little bit more information on the program and some of the intricacies there.
Great.
Well,
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
Okay, great.
One
And I'm
moment,
not
Jordan,
sure-
while I promote you so
can't
you
see
can
me,
share
right?
your
I don't know if I've been
screen.
We cannot see you.
One moment while I promote you.
Sherry, you're on mute.
Now we can.
Okay, great. Hi, nice to see a few of you again. Nice to meet the rest of you. Valerie, thank you for the presentation. I know that we were planning on going through our slide deck, but I think you hit on all of the relevant points. That was a pretty amazing overview. I'll leave it up to everyone here to decide how you want to use the time. I mean, I'm happy to sort of flip through our slide deck if that's useful. But again, I think Valerie did a pretty unbelievable job going over it. So maybe Q&A might be the best use of everyone's time.
I think I'll interject here. I think if there is no unique information, I think we will jump to questions, if that's okay with my fellow council members. And I'll jump right into Member Donahue. Clarifying questions.
It seems like this program would emphasize acquiring older properties whose Prop 13 taxable rates would be really low, so our future taxation would be less affected. And so, it sort of looks like it would push us to put a limitation, like why build new properties when we can be much more future tax efficient for our city by just buying older properties. So that's a question.
We've been able to utilize this, I would say, for both newer assets as well as older assets. And so, I think there's pluses and minuses tied to each. I think you're hitting on sort of interesting connectivity to the existing tax base and ultimately what the city forgoes. One thing I would point out, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when Valerie was touching on the tax loss to the city, it's obviously only the city's share. So I'm not sure, the math behind the 300,000 that was just used in that example. That was obviously just sort of a one-off example. But if what you're saying is for older sort of value add assets, that the tax base is so low, there's a minimal loss to the city while there's still, significant financial upside to the city, we completely agree with that. And I'm glad that Valerie touched on the Arbors transaction in Livermore, because as she mentioned, that was an older asset. Most would call it a value add, which traditionally these days means that someone's going to come along and over improve it and displace a bunch of people and replace them with people who can pay more money. We were able to not only preserve the existing population there, but we're investing $40,000, $50,000 a unit. And as she mentioned, there was an expiring regulatory agreement. We've been not only able to preserve that affordability, but add a lot more. So does that answer your question? Was there something?
Yes, that does. I could keep going, but why don't I give others a chance to ask questions?
Right.
Any members have a clarifying question before we, Ms. Member Medina?
Yeah, thank you. So the bonds are paid off based on the rents paid at the properties, correct? What happens if the properties don't collect enough funds to pay off the bonds?
So the bond issuances are generally 30 to 35 years. They're sold to institutions like BlackRock, PIMCO, Invesco, institutions who do pretty significant and deep underwriting on what they feel both the cash flows of the asset are going to look like, as well as what the long-term appreciation of real estate traditionally looks like in California. One example I always give people, just as an example, if for no other purpose, is, we're never able to pay off $1 of principal over a 30-year period, which is, hard to wrap your head around. But if you assume we're just making interest payments or something over that period of time, and you think about buying an asset for $100 million today, it's pretty easy to think of that being worth, $200, $300 million in 30 years, given what we've seen appreciation-wise of real estate in California. There's still going to be significant equity embedded within that asset. And so the thought of an asset 30 plus years down the road being actually worth less than the debt balance, regardless of sort of what the cash flows would look like, is tough to wrap your head around. But definitely understand the question. I would tell you our number one underwriting metric when we're looking at new opportunities is that we want to, on reasonable assumptions, be able to fully amortize the bonds over the term of the bonds, so 30, 35 years. I always joke with our team that the only thing we know about the pro forma is that it's not going to be accurate, right? It's going to be better, worse. Nobody underwrote COVID and all of the related sort of hiccups to operations. But we try to make really reasonable long-term assumptions around growth rates and expense growth and things like that.
I'm asking about the worst case scenario, though. Like, if that were to be the case, the city would then be on the hook for it financially?
No, the city's never on the hook for anything. Ultimately, it's bondholders who are on the hook for everything. The city is not the owner of the asset. The city is not investing money. The city's not the issuer of the bonds. You're not backstopping or credit enhancing the bonds. We're not diminishing your issuing capacity. The bonds that are being sold to these institutions are solely backed by the project revenues. And if things don't work out over time, it's really, the PIMCOs of the world who have to deal with that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Great. Any other member have a question? Member Vice Mayor Martinez?
Thank you. My question is for staff. Thank you for providing kind of that rough estimate of property tax that would be not paid if we were to move forward with this. But could I get a clarification on what the city's share of that property tax would be, both before our redevelopment bonds are paid off and after? So we had the example of $300,000 annually for a 300 unit multi-housing property.
Sherry, it looks like Chad would like to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Chad Smalley, Economic Development and Housing Manager. And I thought I'd just chime in because I kind of took a look at this and helped to arrive at that. So to Councilmember Donahue's point, it's the first thing is that there's a qualification to this, and that it depends. The loss is going to depend a lot on what the Prop 13 assessed value of a property is. So, and it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's an old property or new property. It has more to do with when it last transacted, how long ago that was, and what the market has done in the meantime. But for purposes of just discussion, we took a 300 unit property, of which the assessed valuation resulted in a 1%, which is 1%, is the property, countywide property tax is 1.7 million. The city's share of that is about 21.7%. So now, in consideration of redevelopment, the way redevelopment works is all in Emeryville, because most of the property is in the redevelopment project area. Nearly all of the assessed value of a huge proportion of the AV is tax increment, and it goes into the real property transfer tax fund. So that trust fund, so that funding, the first call on that funding is the redevelopment agency's recognized obligations. That comes off the top, and then the balance is distributed with that 21.7 coming back to the city. So if it comes off of the rolls, you still lose that amount because some other properties now are paying, the tax increment is paying for those obligations of the former agency. I'm trying, it's kind of complicated, so I hope I've made it somewhat clear, but that's my understanding.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate you clarifying the Prop 13 for us. Member Bowders, do you have any questions before I go to public comments?
No questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Mr. Donnie, another clarifying question?
Yeah, this is, I could imagine, a little theoretical. Like, what is the benefit efficiency per dollar? If the reduced rent payments equal $1, what is the tax benefit to the acquiring bondholders benefit? In other words, is this an efficient use of this kind of equity? Or is BlackRock getting just a huge amount of benefit and we're getting a tiny amount? You know, do you have any sense of the efficiency?
Yeah, I think I'll answer it one way, and you can tell me if this answers your question or not. The yield on these bonds is fairly remarkably low. So if you think about the fact that we are accessing 30 to 35 year fixed rate money at 100% leverage, these properties are 100% debt financed, there's no equity. And we have sold these bonds for as inexpensively as 3.2%, which in the world of, high yield, unrated municipal financing, that's pretty cheap. I mean, if they were guaranteed by the state of California or something, they would be a lot cheaper, but they're solely backed by the project revenues. So to your question about what the investors are getting, that's all they're getting. They're getting, in a perfect world, in that case, I just gave you a 3.2% coupon, paid annually over 30 plus years, right? The value to the city, we've done math for various cities on various transactions where we've shown the tax loss. If you think of the tax loss as an investment for the city, and then you think of your return on investment being the rent subsidies that are provided as well as the financial upside that the asset provides down the road. And we've backdated everything, taken a present value of all those income streams over time. And the return on investment, if you want to look at it that way for the city, is oftentimes, 100x or 200x. And so hopefully that, again, answers your question. And I don't think anyone would look at the yield. In the yield-starved world that we live in today, especially for California-based tax-exempt bonds like this, I don't know that anyone would argue that the bondholders are getting a above-market return for providing this capital.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. And with that, I will see if we have any comment cards or members of the public wishing to speak on this item. Sherry?
We do not at this time.
Okay. Valerie, will you be as kind, or Sherry, is it you who can put up the questions that were asked?
Yes, I can do that.
I love any asset that is capped in its return and infinite in its loss. Right? So, back to slides. Okay. And do we have any members who wish to give feedback in general? Member Donahue?
I would say let's consider not new construction, but properties that were sold 10 or more years ago.
Okay, so you jumped to question 2, which is fine because
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'll tell you that in general, this is exciting. That while it's not going to do anything for our arena numbers, I feel like we're going to make up our arena numbers no problem in other areas. This would be a good thing for our city for helping out housing. And okay, so you got my feedback about existing housing 10 years or more since it was turned over, sold.
All right. Anybody else want to have any general thoughts? Member Bowders, I was wondering if you were going to join us.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while. I have mixed feelings about it, mostly because of Table 3 in the staff report. In Table 3, the base rents they look like the rents that are in the community today. And when you get, with the TCAC financing, I just think of like the tax credit. I mean, I'm trying to make the evaluation of two things. One is the lost property tax revenue the city would experience over 30 years. I feel like I need more information. I don't feel like I'm not necessarily opposed to the concept, but I don't know that I support it yet because I feel like there's more mathematical analysis that needs to be presented about the lost property tax revenue from a property going into this model, weighed against just a number of other financial factors. Like how does, looking at table 3, I have to minimize this screen to pull it back up. But when I look at table 3 on this staff report, and the rent rates, I mean, the rent rates for a 2-bedroom for a low-income unit, under TCAC, the rent limit, it's $24.36 for a low-income family for a 1-bedroom unit. And then it says that the allowable increase is 4%. Well, the state law is 5%. So what are we really, I mean, these rents, I'm just wondering what the actual benefit is to tenants. I don't think we're actually conferring a benefit. I think and I wish we were, I think this is probably a successful model in a lot of communities that don't have our rent levels probably. But I struggle to see the benefit to tenants. I don't agree with the characterization that this would somehow create some sort of like massively affordable housing scenario for us because of the allowable rent limits under TCAC. And when you think about what properties that we have in this city, basically having the property taxes waived is the only reason more expensive properties are purchasable under this model. So I feel like I need more information, because 30 years of committing a property to this system, and then it's all built into the bond model, and so the city doesn't have equity in it. Yes, there's this opportunity to get revenue out of it, but that's not guaranteed. And what is the city's plan for financing the acquisition? And if we even wanted to say, hey, there's this third-party provider who's going to take over, we're going to have someone sit in our stead and do this, take this property, who has the financing to acquire it and then provide the subsidy, and what's going to be the model for that? So I feel like there's just a lot of fiscal questions. I'm not opposed to the idea of something like this just generally. I just wonder whether it's the right fit for our communities, given the fiscal limits that are proposed under this agreement and structure. And I will say, as the liaison to the housing committee, I sat and listened to the housing committee's discussion, and they were all for ways to help create pricing predictability for tenants. But when I saw the tables, it just didn't make sense to me for giving up property tax for 30 years. So those are my thoughts. I welcome staff, Christine or Valerie, if you'd like to respond to it. And then Jordan can respond to that as well. But those are my initial thoughts. I feel like I can't say I'm okay with just saying yes to this today, because I feel like I need to have more concrete fiscal data.
Thank you. Staff, would you like to respond, Valerie?
Absolutely. So no, I definitely appreciate Councilmember Bowder's comments and questions. And I will say that upon first reviewing the program, I had some of those same concerns when it comes to the rent limits. I do think it's a good time to maybe hand over that question, though, to Jordan to try to explain a little bit more about how that works and what's happened with some of the other transactions in regards to, there are maximum rent limits that are published, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually implement them on the properties. Jordan, do you want to try to add a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I would love to. There was a lot there. I was trying to take notes. If I miss anything, definitely, please remind me. So for starters, we at Catalyst did not have input to that chart that you looked at. I want to make it clear that those are, as Valerie just mentioned, those are maximum limits. And I was doing some quick math as I was looking at that chart. I hadn't seen that before tonight. And it looked like those rents were 35% of those income levels. And we're operating our portfolio today at about a 30% rent to income ratio, which is in line with more traditional, capital A affordable housing. This whole model hinges on, so ORIC is our bond firm that does all of the legal work around this. In order for us to properly issue municipal bonds to create a public benefit in this way, through the creation of affordable housing, it has to be very clear and completely black and white. There's an analysis done that we have to be taking rent levels, from A to B, right? There has to be a discount to market. You have to be creating a public benefit. That benefit has to truly live with the public on a long-term basis. So regardless of what a chart may say mathematically as to what the maximum allowable rents are, our starting rents day one are always significantly below market. And so back to this regulatory agreement that was mentioned, the traditional regulatory agreement that we implement, just as a reminder, I think Valerie touched on this, a third of the units are at 80% AMI. Pretty much everywhere in the Bay Area, 80% rents are significantly below market. A third are at 100%. Even in high AMI markets, if, for example, our 100% rents because of the AMI levels locally were sort of bumping up against market, we would artificially reduce those rents even further to make sure that those rents and that 2/3 of our rents, both the 80 and 100% levels, were significantly below market. And then you have the 120% category, which again, depending on how nice or old the property is and where it's located, what the AMI levels are, obviously there's a difference between Alameda County and Marin County and Solano County, all areas where we've done work. Then those could be close to market. I would say on your comment about AB 1482, as well as if you think about the way that traditional LIHTC assets work, where the rents can grow at AMI growth levels annually. On AB 1482, our understanding is that that's actually 5% plus CPI, which could be a lot higher than 5%. And additionally, ours is capped at 4% a year. And again, you're starting at significantly below market. And our thought is that as time goes on, that affordability it will be wider and wider, because the maximum our tenants will ever get is a 4% increase. In the LIHTC world, where you can increase people annually based on what the annual HUD figures do, we've had double-digit increases annually year after year here for the past number of years. And so even at fully affordable LIHTC communities, you've seen tenants getting double-digit increases, which you would never get at our property. On the tax exemption side of thing, I know it's been explained a couple of different ways, and it's hard to do this hypothetically because every asset's different. As it was pointed out earlier, something could have been, because of Prop 13 protection, maybe the taxes haven't been reassessed for 20 years, 30 years. One way that I look at this is, even if you assume a brand new property is being acquired today for $500,000 a unit, and at a 1% property tax rate, that's $5,000 per unit annually in taxes. And I think I heard that locally, this is a lot different than other cities. Most cities we deal with get about 8 to 12% of the tax revenues. But if that number is 20% locally, that's $1,000 per unit annually to the city in property tax loss. And if you wanted to divide that by 12 and look at that monthly and sort of compare that to rent, it's about $80 per unit. And so if you I think about this a couple of ways. What is the overall rent reduction in comparison to the property tax loss? That's one way to look at it. What does it typically cost a city to subsidize the production of affordable housing? And how long does that traditionally take? And when you think about the city not having to actually do anything here, and overnight we can buy an asset and flip the switch and provide affordability. And when you run through that math, it's effectively $80 per unit per month is sort of the subsidy. And then again, you compare that to not only the immediate availability of housing for essential workers and others below market, but the long-term financial upside of the asset. And then maybe that's, I heard you talk about that a little bit as well. I do want to make it clear that on a long-term basis, the city has an option. The city has no obligation to ever take title to an asset. And so, one example we give is that we acquire an asset, the city has this option, we never hear from the city ever again. 30 years goes by, the 15-year option window that the city had opens and closes. And at that point, if 30 years goes by and Cal CHA has never heard from the city, they have the ability at that time to sell the asset. They would sell the asset, and the net sales proceeds would be given to the city. So the city never did anything other than approve this 30 years prior. To your point about sort of the ongoing needs to finance it or operate it or having the capabilities to do that or know-how, again, if you have an unencumbered asset, if you think of these bonds being fully amortized over the terms of the bond term, and you have an asset that's worth whatever it's worth in 30 years and there's no debt against it, you can provide realistically, on an unencumbered basis, you could provide any affordability level you'd want. If you wanted to convert that asset so that it solely serves households at 60% or 80% of AMI, there's still going to be significant cash flow, even if you're, reinvesting capital into improvements. If there's no debt service at all against an asset like that, and you have all the freedom and flexibility in the world to bring rents down or do whatever you like with it. But we don't look at the long-term option and the long-term granting of all of the financial upside as a liability. We look at it as an asset, and it's also an option. There's no obligation. So I don't know if I missed anything there. Sorry to be long. I was just trying to make sure I hit on some of the things that you had raised.
Mr. Mayor, just a couple of small follow-ups to that. So let's assume for a moment that you've got, the housing stock that you'd be interested in buying in this city is all new for the most part. So to the Prop 13 question, there's very little multi-unit housing in this city that is old, that's been held by someone for a long time. Most of it is in the last 15 years. So, that is kind of the baseline. So yeah, the tax, you're if you buy it and it's affordable and you don't have to pay property taxes, you're getting a huge benefit. And so I just want to be transparent to my colleagues, like we're shifting the benefit of the tax roll, instead of it being a revenue maker for us or coming in as us. This is why I have this fiscal question. We're basically allowing, by being in the JPA and letting CalCHA acquire it, they're taking away that benefit from us, and they're getting the benefit of the tax break through TCAC, but we're getting in return this stabilized market of rental units. And I heard you say, so that's the model essentially, but what I heard you say is that if the rents are higher, you said you reduce rents, right? You come into a property, you'd even reduce them. But how, so just take like the Courtyards at 65th, which sold, a year and a half ago. Like in that situation, those rents were all over $3,000, except for the 40 units that are below market rate by agreement with a deed restricted regulatory agreement with the city. So in that case, those rents already exceeded what these tables would allow. So you're literally saying you're going to pull them way farther down below the TCAC limit, or you're pulling them down to what is kind of just the market rate in Emeryville to begin with, is kind of how I feel. So I'm just wondering, I heard you give the example and do some math about $80, right? But that wouldn't actually be true in some of these examples. That's kind of where I'm looking at the fiscal analysis and just wondering, like we could actually be losing property tax value as a city. And if the majority of council wants to do that, I think that's a gambit they're willing to do. I'm not opposed to having that discussion. I just want to be transparent about where the money goes in the end, because what you're saying is, I don't think you're being dishonest. I just think that you're right about something you said, which is that it's really a property by property kind of scenario, because the model you gave very much could exist, but the model I'm giving could very much exist too. And in one case, the city is in the net losing tax revenue. Would you agree or not?
I'm a little bit confused. We're familiar with Courtyards at 65th. I think that's when we started our conversations with the city, because we obviously had an interest in making a run at that. One thing I want to clarify, I would say when you're saying the city is losing property tax revenues and you have to think about where it's going, I agree. It's going to subsidize rents for the people who live at the building, right? It's not going to CalCHA as a tax exempt government entity. Maybe just slightly different way of looking at it. But that's why I was comparing on a per unit basis, the tax loss to, if you want to look at that as a subsidy to the people who live there, and think about the fact that their rents are going to be further below market than the equivalent of the tax loss. And again, I go back to, sort of the institutional sort of belt and suspenders approach that exists here, with needing to go to a firm like Oric and for a tax partner there to sign off on the fact that rents are truly being, reduced, that there is an, unmet demand for middle income housing that's not being provided, that we are filling, that a public benefit's being created and sort of granted to the public on a long-term basis. There's no way I think if I was hearing one of your examples right, you were sort of saying we get a tax exemption, but rents aren't reduced. This program cannot operate in that way. Like, we would never even be able to acquire something and issue the bonds if we were pretending to be providing affordable housing, but just operating market rate housing with a property tax exemption.
I think what you're saying is fair. I'm not trying to suggest that it's not complying with the regulations that are out there. I'm just looking at the dollars and cents of like, what is the benefit? Because we're making a policy decision that says for the next 30 years, we will not see property tax revenue. We have decided for 30 years of councils after us that revenue that would have come from building X, right, instead is going to the benefit of the tenants who live there by basically, to your point, subsidizing the rent. So we're locking in a policy decision and further reducing the amount of decision making we have in terms of fungible assets that are regularly coming into the city. So every property that comes in, and this may be a question of if the council really wants this may be like, well, we limit the number of properties that are allowed to do this. That may be the issue. It may be there may be other types of ways to rein that in, but I'm looking at it from, I have a bank account that takes in a certain amount of money per year, and now there's something that's going to lock up a percentage of the revenue that the city gets, and it's going to be locked into rent subsidies, which is a good policy decision. But the question I have for my colleagues is just, do you want to do that for 30 years, and to what extent? Because that takes that out of the general fund revenues that we have that we spend on other programs. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
You're welcome. Yes, City Manager.
So if I could just weigh in from the perspective, and perhaps I might be just restating what Councilmember Bowders said, but in a different way. So this is a study session. We're not asking you to make any decisions. And actually, the second question in your staff report was whether you were interested in joining the JPA. So that's something that we want you to discuss. Right. But this is a study session coming to you from a housing policy perspective that presents a unique model to look at having the CalCHA acquire these units and focusing on the moderate level. That is, as Ms. Bernardo pointed out earlier, we are struggling to find ways to support moderate income units. With that said, speaking as your city manager, a full analysis of the entire picture would, I think, we would owe you a fiscal analysis of the overall impacts of what it would look like to take those property tax dollars and dedicate them to this program for that period of time. And of course, the situation that we're in right now with our property taxes dedicated to redevelopment bonds through 2034, the little bit that we get, we use for very specific purposes. And our unique fiscal situation where we're relying on hotel tax and sales tax and business license tax that are all struggling right now, I think we owe you, we get a fiscal advisor in to do, a financial advisor in to do an analysis for you of what that foregone property tax would look like. Do the analysis of the redevelopment debt service so that you get a fuller picture of what this would mean in terms of the policy trade-offs for other programs and services of the city. So not diminishing this important policy objective, but giving you the opportunity to look at the trade-offs for other policy objectives that you might have. Thank you, Mr.
I'm going to ask a clarifying question here because I was thinking about this while Member Bowders was speaking, and you got close to what I was thinking, but not quite there. When I read through the staff report and watched the presentation, what I saw, and I can tell you it's on page 5, the city responsibility. I read that, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, that we approve the particular asset that's acquired. So before you guys come in and purchase anything and issue bonds, you present a property and we have to approve it. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Seeing a big nodding of yes. So I'm sorry?
Yes, that would be the city manager. The city council would designate that authority to the city manager.
Okay, so it can happen in a timely fashion. Okay.
Correct.
So, because that was my thought, is that gives us a chance when there is an actual property that's being looked at, that we could then run the numbers, not theoretically, but actually based on the asset, because right now it's all kind of a guessing game. I also get stuck on the Prop 13 thing, we would get we'd be losing maximum taxability on a property that's acquired because we're not imminently domaining a property. We are taking something that comes on the market and is about to sell, which means that it loses all of its Prop 13 rights and would be at the maximum tax, property tax level or valuation, the maximum valuation at that point, and not some previous one. So if this entity doesn't buy it through the bonds and another developer or property manager does, they'd be paying the highest or the full fair value of the property in taxes. Okay, other questions or thoughts from other council members? Member Medina, and then Vice Mayor Martinez afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the clarification. My feedback is that I'm interested in it. I'm interested in learning or seeing a fiscal analysis of it. Concerned about potential impact to our general fund through property taxes, of course. And if we were to come back with a fiscal analysis, maybe a bad idea, but would it be possible to reimburse the general fund out of our Measure C bond money so that it would be less of a constraint on our general fund, which is going to be severely taxed? Just throwing it out there as a could we do that? And also I wanted to say, Valerie, thank you for this excellent slideshow. You put words on the slide that were highlights, and then you explained in more depth. And I just really appreciate you using the format of the slideshow the way it was intended, and I got a lot out of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great, Vice Mayor Martinez?
Thank you. I agree. This was a good presentation. And I'm interested in getting information. I agree with the sentiment that we could use more financial analysis, more in-depth samples of return on investment. And I had a question that I feel like I should have known the answer to this some time ago, but when we calculate our local area median income, what is our area? Is it the city? Is it the East Bay? Can someone from staff just clarify that for me, please?
Absolutely. It's Alameda County.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I will say this, that even when we do look at what we adopt on an annual basis, we're pulling information that's issued by HUD and also issued by HCD. So everywhere across Alameda County is going to have the same income limits. However, there are differences in the rent limits that is adopted by each jurisdiction because there's an interpretation that can be made and sometimes is made differently. And I point that out only because I have done a little bit of an analysis, and we do have the lowest rent limits across the county.
Interesting. Okay, I'm looking at the time, and what I'm hearing from a couple of you, but not all of you, is that we'd like to bring this back for another study session with a little bit more of a financial lens. Am I reading the room correctly, or am I making stuff up? I see 2 thumbs up. I see 3 thumbs up. Okay, I read the room correctly. Note that down on the record because that doesn't happen. So City Manager, does that provide enough clarity for you instead of going back to those questions?
That does, thank you.
Yeah, all right. I think that was the only, Mr. Moss, I appreciate your presentation as well and answering those questions. I hope staff warned you that you were going to get some really in-depth questions from us on this fiscal end. I have mixed thoughts on this model. So I appreciate your time and thank you. And I want to echo, I loved the slideshow. It was really on point and appreciated that as well. And we are now closer to the next meeting. So I will say it is 7:14. We are adjourned and I'll see you all back here in a minute. because I think Member Medina will join us before I'm completely through my thing. So it is 7:15. I call to order the November 17th Successor Agency regular meeting. And if we'll do roll call, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Here.
Councilmember Donahue? I'm seeing him there. Councilmember Medina?
Here.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Here.
And Mayor Pats.
I am here, and before we move into the agenda, I'd like to state for the record that this meeting is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to a Brown Act waiver provided under the governor's executive order in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. During the health emergency, City Hall is closed to the public. The agenda states that the public may view the meeting that is being live streamed online and on ETV channel 27 and provide comment by submitting an online comment form, which will be then read into the record by staff. The comment form can be accessed by going to our main City of Emeryville website at www.emeryville.org and clicking on Council Agendas and Videos. Once there, you will see a link entitled Submit an Online Speaker Card. The public also has the option of participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom and may provide public comment during the meeting by using the Raise Your Hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9. The Zoom call information was provided on the posted agenda, as well as via e-notification on social media. Okay, with that, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And I'll second it. Roll call, or vote, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay. Any ex parte for this agenda? Seeing none, I'll go right to a motion for the public comment. Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar or items not on this agenda?
I see none at this time.
All right. Do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
I move the consent calendar.
I'll second it and vote, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay. With that, we have no action items. It is 7:18. This meeting is adjourned. Terry, let me know when you're ready.
All right, one moment, please. Okay, all set.
Great. It is 7:18. I call to order the City Council regular meeting on today, November 17th, 2020. We just did the roll call, so I'm going to skip that and get to a motion for the agenda. Before I take a motion, I believe the city manager would like to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to the agenda, item 11.1, the shared mobility ordinance agenda, staff is requesting that you take no action on that item tonight, and we will make no presentation. We've had some feedback from one of the involved companies that we need to consider and potentially make some revisions. And so we will return with that item at a later date. Given that the item is, however, on your posted agenda, once you get to that item, we would request that you still provide the public the opportunity to make public comment. But again, we ask that you take no action and we will make no presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. With that caveat, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay. That brings us to special orders of the day, which we have none. Announcement of commission vacancies.
Yes, I do have an announcement this evening, Mayor Pats. We have collected a handful of vacancies, unexpected vacancies on our committees and commissions at this time, so we are going to open a recruitment, and the positions are Two actually will arise from the resignation from a member of the Commission on Aging. So there will be a resident seat on Commission on Aging and an associated ACTC Paratransit Advisory and Planning Commission position. So those two will be on the recruitment, as well as a business representative for the Budget Advisory Committee and a large business representative for the Economic Development Advisory Committee. And the applications, this will all be on our website, but the applications will be due by Monday, January 4th, and the appointments are scheduled to be made, assuming that we get applicants, they'll be made at the council's February 2nd meeting of 2021. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Council members' special announcement reports on meetings attended.
Been so long since we last met, I'm triple checking.
I'm happy to go first. I attended the mayor's conference last week. We had a presentation from somebody from the Air Quality Management District. I don't remember who that was. And then we talked to all the outgoing mayors, including the president of the mayor's conference, who is going to be moving to the supervisors. And that was really the only thing of merit. I think my housing committee meeting got postponed until tomorrow. So with that, I'll throw it to anybody else who has any special announcements. Member Bowders?
I want to thank the city staff in Emeryville, in particular the city manager, Mary Grace Houlihan and Ryan O'Connell, as well as the staff at the Alameda County Transportation Commission. It was brought to our attention in the 11th hour that the Union Pacific Railroad was going to require us to rebuild signal houses at 67th and 65th Streets, and that was going to put in jeopardy to the tune of over $1 million. And that was going to put in jeopardy our state CTC grant for our railroad safety improvements and quiet zones. And the city staff notified me, and I got in touch with ACTC, and we all got together, and the transportation committee also weighed in on this. And we were able to find the money from prior projects that have been holding on to old money that we never used from a long time ago, and recommended a number of things that are here. And I just want to thank all those people now, because the commission voted at committee last week and will vote this coming week to approve our financing plan, which means the city can go to the state CTC by its deadline in January and finally go and collect the money we need to do this project next year. So that is my only big update from ACTC for right now.
Excellent. Anybody else attend any committees? Any report outs? Nope. Okay. I feel like we have met since Halloween, but we have not. I just want to say a big shout out to Community Services for their trunk or treat. They did an amazing job in, I think we gave over 100 gift bags out to seniors and kids from the preschool. It was a lot of fun, and I want to thank my fellow council members who came out. And it was really a good event. And I think we also had a drive-in movie from them, which was also excellent. So we're still doing a few community events here and there. Don't get your hopes up for anything on Christmas, though. So with that, we move on to, where am I at in my script here? Okay, city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we did have those two great events, and thank you for your support of those particularly. Just wanted to acknowledge that we will be closed for the Thanksgiving holiday next week. Not that the public can maybe really tell, but we just wanted as staff to express our thankfulness for all of you. It is really a delight to have a council who is as collegial and hardworking as you all are, and who dresses up for Halloween, which we all really appreciate. So we are just grateful to have you and thankful for that. So we will be closed for Thanksgiving.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. That brings us to ex parte communications. Any ex parte? All right, seeing none. That brings us to public comment for consent agenda items or items not on the agenda. Now is the time for this comment of the meeting. Anyone who wishes to make comments related to items not on the agenda or on the consent agenda should have submitted your online speaker card by now. 3 minutes will be allowed for the city clerk to read your comments into the record. If you're participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9. At this time, I'll ask the city clerk whether we've had any submitted comments.
We have one raised hand, Brian Donahue. One moment.
Great.
Unmute and go ahead.
Okay, with the COVID-19, the coronavirus, newly reinvigorated, and crashing into the population now at an alarming rate. I think it's really a good time to reflect on the city of Emeryville's recklessness, I should say, with regard to the virus. Previously, as I've reported to you, the city was taking its county mask covering guidelines, or I should say orders, seriously. I complained about workers at development projects not wearing masks, and the city dispatched in one case a building department employee, an inspector, to the site in a surprise visit, and that building inspector, the city building inspector, found 14 violations at the Lennar Corporation's Sherwin-Williams site. 14 violations of workers not wearing masks, many of them within 6 feet of each other. This is against the protestations of Lennar, who is saying that they are always complying. So we found out that Lennar's, lo and behold, the for-profit corporation is lying, we found. So good on the city for that. However, in the intervening months, the city has abandoned it's not taking responsibility at all anymore now for attempting to get workers to wear masks as the county requires the city to do. And the city is punting on it. Even with this virus now redoubling its deadly, attack against us, the city is no longer doing that. There was announced, Charlie Bryan announced to me, the planning director, that the city is no longer going to do that, but instead when they get calls for complaints, they'll do nothing. But however, the building inspectors will note if workers are wearing masks at their regularly scheduled building inspections, which is absurd on its face, because the workers will be warned that the building inspector is coming, and everyone will put the mask on. In the meanwhile, I have noted with my binoculars violations at the Maz site, the intersection site, and the Lennar Sherwin-Williams site. 100% of the times I've checked, I've noted violations. Workers working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, without masks, 100% of the time. So I've got photos, documentations of some of them. I don't have a telephoto lens on my camera, so it's really kind of hard. But I've called this city to tell them about this, and the city is insisting on doing nothing. So it is reckless. It's reckless behavior. And the first job of any government, including this government, is to protect the people. You're not doing it. You're not protecting the people.
That's your time.
That's a central function of governance.
Okay, any other public comment?
None at this time.
Not at this time. Okay. That brings us to the consent calendar. I have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Do I have a second? All right, I have a motion from Member Bowders and a second from Member Medina. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Yes. Okay. And that brings us to item 11, public hearings. And at this point, I will just open it up for public comment. Do you want me to open the hearing, City Manager, and take comment on this, or just have public comment?
Just public comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Okay. I will open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on shared mobility?
One raised hand, Brian Donahue.
Okay.
Unmute and go ahead.
Name on the city of Emeryville. shame is on you for not doing your due diligence to protect the people of the city of Emeryville, which is your number one function. That's your job one, is protect the people, and shame on you for abandoning your duty to protect vis-a-vis the county mask ordinance. Shame on you.
I guess that's it.
We lose him, or is he done?
I guess he's done, yes.
All right, that was a 3 shame comment. Okay. All right, that brings us to item 12.1, temporary use permits.
Mr. Mayor, just as a point of order, can I just clarify with the city staff that because we went to the agenda item, do you need us to do anything or like a motion to continue this item from 11.1 or no?
We don't need you to do that.
Okay.
We don't have a date certain to bring it back. If you, I mean, obviously it's on the agenda if you'd like to make any comment or provide anything like that, but we don't need it.
My only comment, Mr. Mayor, was I just wanted to ask if we, in that bringing it back process, could we refer it to the Transportation Committee?
That would be fine with staff. Yeah, we're happy to do that. It's a policy discussion.
Doesn't require a motion, just direction. If there's a majority, I would just ask that we do that.
I support that.
Yeah.
We'll take that direction.
I see a third thumb. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It looked like Charlie Bryant is going to speak. Is this your item?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. I got confused for a moment there. All right, Mr. Bryant, if you would speak on the urgency ordinance.
All right. You have before you tonight both an urgency ordinance and a regular ordinance to temporarily waive certain provisions of the planning regulations related to temporary use permits for COVID-related uses. As the council may recall, back in June, you passed an urgency ordinance and a regular ordinance temporarily waiving or modifying certain provisions of the planning regulations related to outdoor seating for restaurants and bars during the pandemic. The expedited permitting process that those ordinances created has been quite successful. And so far, staff has approved approximately a dozen permits for outdoor dining. In the meanwhile, staff has received inquiries about temporary use permits for other types of outdoor activities prompted by the COVID pandemic, including a proposal by the Oaks Club for outdoor gaming in their parking lot. Now, the ordinances that are the ordinance that you passed in June does not make provisions for any uses other than outdoor dining. Therefore, any temporary use permits for these other uses would be limited to what the current regulations are, which is 60 days for the temporary use permit and, of course, the current application fee. So staff now proposes to waive the 60-day time limit and the application fee for all temporary use permits for COVID-related uses for the duration of the pandemic emergency. And we're defining COVID-related uses as uses that have modified their normal operations because of the COVID-19 pandemic and uses that conduct COVID-19 related activities. So those that have modified their normal operations would include things that have moved operations outdoors that would normally be conducted indoors. It could be other things as well. And uses that conduct COVID-related activities are things that are directly related to COVID, such as COVID testing, treatment, and research facilities. It should be noted that a temporary use permit for a business that is not COVID related, such as a pumpkin patch or a Christmas tree lot or a farmer's market, are typical routine temporary use permits that we approve every year, would continue to be subject to the existing provisions of the planning regulations with the time limit and the normal fee. I also want to note that unlike the ordinance you passed in June, this is only for temporary use permits. It does not include sidewalk cafes. Temporary use permits are for private property, does not include the public sidewalk. And so anything that would be a parklet or use of the public sidewalk would not be covered by this ordinance. It would only be for temporary use permits on private property. The proposed urgency ordinance would take effect immediately and cease to be effective when the regular ordinance takes effect. And the regular ordinance would take effect 30 days following its final passage and will expire 180 days after the date of the termination of the state of emergency. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
have one. Yeah, thank you so much, Charlie. My clarifying question is, so for a business like, let's say, a barber shop that was providing haircuts on the sidewalk, would they have access to some sort of COVID permit?
On the sidewalk, this would not cover the sidewalk. This would only cover the private property. If a business wanted to conduct business on the sidewalk, they would need to get an encroachment permit from Public Works.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay, we'll now open it up for public comment on this item. I see a raised hand. Do we have any comment cards before we go to the raised hand?
No comment cards at this time.
All right, let's go to Mr. Donahue.
All right, unmute and go ahead.
So this is an urgency order for the city council. Apparently that businesses be given a pass or somewhat of a pass in the wake of the COVID pandemic. And it's urgent that these businesses be given this pass and we work with the businesses. But what I'm wondering is, why doesn't the city of Emeryville find it urgent that you're not doing your due diligence vis-a-vis COVID spreading at these work sites? This costs no money, requires no urgency findings, requires no extending, more freedom or what have you to, code relaxation to businesses. It's just, you're doing what the county is requiring you to do. I just don't know why. Why the policy change? Before, it was considered reasonable oh, there goes Ms. Medina. What happened? Before, it was considered reasonable. Maybe she's joining Christian Patz, the mayor, in leaving whenever I comment. That's a pleasant thought. Before, it was considered reasonable in the city of Emeryville that that you don't trust these for-profit development corporations, and instead you check on you send a surprise visit from the building department out to the site, not to trust the developers. That was the previous default policy of the city of Emeryville. Something happened to change it to now putting full trust in the developers who claim that they are obeying the law, even though we know that they aren't because they got caught. At least one of them did, Lennar. So why the change in the policy? You guys have decided to throw total trust, and this is a life and death issue, to these for-profit developers. I want to know why. So the Brown Act provides that a little bit of discussion can happen on this topic, not, of course, substantive debate, but the people have a right to know why are you relaxing this county COVID mask wearing order that you have been given from Alameda County? I mean, why the change in policy? If somebody could volunteer and say a few things to the people about why you're putting their lives at risk now, I'll mute myself.
Okay, any other public comment on the urgency ordinance? Seeing none, we'll go into discussion. Member Bowders?
I just want to thank Charlie and the staff for working so expeditiously to accommodate businesses in our community and coming up with something that will help the city both economically, but also from an employment and proprietorship standpoint, also keep people employed and moving forward during a challenging time. So thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, perfect. Any other comments, Member Donahue?
I assume that each of these businesses would still have to comply with the county specifications. For example, if the Oaks Club were to have outdoor gaming, they could only have two sides, a short side and a long side of, say, a tent that would block the wind, so that two sides would be open. They would be constrained by county regulations. Isn't that true, Charlie?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, okay, good. I think I was muted there for a little bit. They would, just as in the previous ordinance that you passed back in June, they would still be required to comply with all COVID-19 protocols established by the county and the state, as well as any other applicable local, state, and federal laws. Concerning the enclosure of whatever tent structure they would put up, I'm not personally familiar with the details of what those requirements are, but whatever they are, they would be required to comply with them.
If I could just interject, Councilmember Donahue, there are specific county regulations with regard to outdoor gaming that they would be required to comply with as well.
Right, right.
Okay, thank you.
I think we would be coming second to this game. I think other cities, municipalities have gaming already open, so we're probably going to lead. Vice Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a motion to read by title only. This is for the urgency ordinance.
And I will second that right after I thank Mr. Bryant and his whole team for putting this together. I agree with what Member Bowders was saying. While I don't know how it's going to look in the coming month, but I think the idea that we can begin to shift some outdoor activities is a good thing. And so with that, we have a motion and a second to read by title only. Vote, please.
Councilmember Bowders. Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Mr. Guina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. An urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville temporarily waiving or modifying certain provisions of the planning regulations related to temporary use permits for COVID-related uses. CEQA determination exempt pursuant to California Public Resources Code, Section 21080 sub B4, and State CEQA Guidelines 15269 sub C and 15061 sub B3.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Martinez, I suspect you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'd love to move to read by title on the regular ordinance, please.
Let's take the vote on the ordinance first and then do the second one.
Sorry, the urgency ordinance.
So we'll take a vote on the urgency.
Not to read by title, but yeah, to adopt the urgency ordinance.
I'll second that.
Your hand is still raised, Vice Mayor. I don't have the. Yeah, there we go.
We ready for the vote?
Yes, please.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, Vice Mayor, I'm going to come right back to you for the title only motion.
Oh, you are coming back to me? I thought you were.
Coming right back to you.
Yes, okay, yes. I will make that motion now to read by title on the proposed ordinance.
Excellent.
I'll second it, even though I think Mr. Guina has a lovely reading voice.
Mr. Guina, the floor. Oh, we need a vote. Sorry, let's take the actual vote on that.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Mr. Guina. Mr. Guina, you are muted. Mr. Guina,
Whoa.
you're muted.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Your dulcet tones.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville temporarily waiving or modifying certain provisions of the planning regulations related to temporary use permits for COVID-related uses, CEQA determination exempt pursuant to California Public Resources Code, Section 21080B4, and State CEQA Guidelines 15269 sub C and 15061 sub B3.
Excellent. Okay. Vice Mayor, would you like to move approval?
Sure, I move approval on the proposed ordinance.
Member Medina, would you like to second?
Oh yeah, let's second it.
It's a perfect sweep on those. Vote, please, Sherry.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, well done. That brings us to 12.2, the loan.
Thank you, Mayor. This is my item. If Sherry could put up the PowerPoint, I have a short presentation. Great, thank you. For your consideration tonight is a loan request from the successor agency to the city to fund environmental remediation at the courtyard site pursuant to an imminent and substantial endangerment order from the State Department Toxic and Substances Control, or DTSC. Next slide, please. So by way of background, in August of this year, the DTSC served on the successor agency an imminent and substantial endangerment order, which obligates the successor agency to undertake certain soil and groundwater remediation at the courtyard site. The successor agency's only funding source is real property tax transfer funds, or RPTTF, from a approved recognized obligation payment schedule, or ROPS. We are currently in the ROPS 2020/2021 year, and the successor agency would not be able to put the order on the ROPS and request funding to meet the obligations under the order until the ROPS 21-22 cycle. And that funding would not be available to the successor agency until July 1 of 2021. So the issue that faces the successor agency is a matter of timing. The DTSC order obligates the successor agency to do the work now, but the successor agency won't have that funding available until July of 2021. Next slide, please. So as one possible alternative or solution, the successor agency at its last meeting has directed staff to come to the City Council and seek a short-term loan from the city. If granted, that loan would be paid by the successor agency from its RPTTF funds in the ROPS 21-22 year. The conditions precedent to that loan being extended and the proceeds spent would be twofold. One, that the DOF actually approves a loan agreement, and second, that the loan agreement appears on the approved ROPS. If those conditions, if the city did decide to extend the loan and that the conditions precedent were met, then the successor agency would be able to start the remediation as early as mid-April or May of 2021. Next slide, please. Any city agency loan agreement would be a new enforceable obligation, which would require a twofold approval. One, it would have to be put on the ROPS and approved through that process. And secondly, as a new enforceable obligation, the DOF would have to provide a separate approval process. Next slide, please. As for that approval process through the DOF, the slide goes through that calendar. The Oversight Board would approve it in its January meeting, and then the DOF would have 5 days to decide whether or not it would review the Oversight Board action. If the DOF decided to review the Oversight Board's approval of the loan agreement, the DOF would have 40 days to make a decision, which would put us into mid-March of 2021. Note that under this process, there is no meet and confer obligation if the DOF had decided to disapprove the loan obligation. So if the DOF did disapprove the loan agreement at this stage, then the preconditions for the loan would not have been met, and the loan would not be extended and the proceeds could not be spent. If, however, the DOF did approve the loan agreement, the second hurdle would still need to be overcome, which would be approval of the ROPS on which the loan agreement would be placed. And so if you could go to the next slide, please. The schedule for the ROPS 21-22 approval is here. The successor agency and the Oversight Board would take action to consider the ROPS at their January meetings, and then the ROPS would be submitted to the DOF in early February. The DOF would make an initial determination of the ROPS in mid-April. If the DOF approved the ROPS with the line item of the loan agreement on it, the process is done. If, however, they disapproved it, then the successor agency can request a meet and confer with a final determination from the DOF in mid-May of 2021. Taking the two processes together, if a loan agreement obtains the necessary approvals from the Oversight Board and the DOF, the funds could be released and to the successor agency and spent by mid-April or mid-May 2021. Next slide, please. In terms of the loan itself, the successor agency is requesting a loan in the amount of $250,000. That would be used to retain the services of EKI for environmental engineering services, for the groundwater and soil remediation required by the DTSC order. The repayment would be done through the ROPS 21-22 proceeds anticipated by the end of July in 2021, with the interest rate of 1.47% pursuant to statute. The staff report notes that the city has earmarked $11 million in capital improvement funding in its CIP for those for courtyard improvements. Those funds could be used as a funding source for the loan. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the successor agency considered this at their October 20th meeting and directed staff to approach the City Council with a request tonight. And next slide, please. So the staff recommendation is that you consider this report and any public comment, and then provide direction as to whether or not, first, the city wishes to extend a loan to the successor agency, and if the city would like that loan to be pursuant to the terms that were provided in the staff report. If the City Council does wish to proceed, then we can bring that item to you at your next meeting. That's the conclusion of my report, and I'm available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Any clarifying questions? Seeing none, I'll go to public comment, but before I do, I want to appreciate the city attorney for saying with a straight face that one board has asked him to approach the exact same human beings to ask for this loan. That is a lovely moment, surrealism for myself. I believe we have a comment. I suspect it'll be tangentially related to loans and masks.
Yes. Unmute and go ahead, please.
Okay, so the city is being asked to trust with this request. You're being asked to trust the Department of Toxic, the DTSC. Okay, and what's going to happen here is that an existing cap of asphalt and or concrete is going to be removed, and then the soils are going to be disturbed, thereby releasing toxins into the environment. Kind of things that could give people things like kidney cancer. So we have to be extremely careful with the kind of toxins that are in the soil in this area. We know that right next door is just boatloads of arsenic and VOCs. So that's the kind of thing that gives people kidney cancer. So we have to be really careful. So is DTSC the right lead agency to use? Well, let's take a look at their record. We see that what they did with regard to the Sherwin-Williams cleanup, they have a whistleblower, one of their own employees, the former project manager, who has alerted everyone with demonstrable proof that the DTSC was remiss in its job to properly administer the cleanup of the site. We're talking actual corruption. So again, now you're considering the DTSC for this project. I have a suggestion. I think you should hand off the lead agency to the water board, the regional water board, because like I said, DTSC has been tried and been found wanting. They're not they dropped the ball at the Sherwin-Williams site. And so why should we reward them with another, oversight of another toxic cleanup in Emeryville and put our people in danger? And I just don't think you should do it. So that's my comment. It has nothing to do with mass, Mayor Pats. And, I don't appreciate those kind of snide comments. And I think the mayor should just not be so cavalier about, criticizing public speakers. Okay, so DTSC should be swapped over for the water board. That's my comment.
Any other public comment this evening? All right. Discussion. Member Bowders.
I would just like staff to verify for the education of everyone else at the public, the city doesn't have any discretion as to which state agency actually manages the remediation and oversight of that. That's the state's function at the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Whether members of the public approve of the process or their work in other fora, in this location, this is under the ambit and jurisdiction of them. And the city is responding to state law that requires us to develop a remediation plan, which is the obligation of the successor agency to the redevelopment agency, which is the reason why the city attorney outlined the successor agency has requested a loan, because in the absence of us, having the ROPS approved, which we've tried to do for a couple of years now on this site, and the State Department of Finance has rejected that application, and we are pursuing options to have that remedied. But in the interim, part of that strategy is the department has actually given us a letter compelling us to do that work. And so we need to take at least the first steps, because in the end, the successor agency is obligated to remediate that. City Attorney, have I captured that properly?
Correct. Correct. The DTSC is the proper regulatory authority. The city does not have the ability to pick and choose who the regulatory authority is. DTSC has properly exercised its authority here, and that authority and that order obligates the successor agency to undertake the remedial actions.
Thank you. So pending further comment, of course, Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion to give staff direction to come back with a agreement for a loan comprised of the terms staff has recommended in the report.
Noted. Any other member comments?
I second that. I agree. We should prepare the loan documents for us.
For us, yes.
For other us?
For the other us. For us before 7/16. So, all right. Cheryl, we have a motion and a second and no other member comments, so let's take the vote, please.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to our next item, which I believe is on mural. So, oops, I have lost my spot. All right. This is item 12.3, adopting the guidelines for public art murals. Emmy, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Ms. Hartz, can you help with the PowerPoint, please?
I sure can. Hold on.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pats and members of council. Thank you for this opportunity to present the Public Art Mural Program guidelines to you for your consideration. Next slide, please. Actually, I believe it was the slide before this. That's okay, I'll just work from this. By way of background, the Public Art Master Plan adopted by the City Council in November 2016 includes a program goal to develop mural guidelines. The Master Plan notes that the community and local business owners had taken an interest in murals for the purpose of beautifying the city and suggests using key multimodal corridors, in other words, those that have access by vehicle, bicycle, or pedestrian pathways, to place the murals to allow for maximum public benefit. Soon after adoption of the master plan by council, In January 2017, the Public Art Committee expressed support for the development of guidelines for the mural program and for it to include a list of opportunity sites where those murals would be encouraged in order to promote equal access to this form of public art. Next slide, please. Development of the guidelines has now been 2.5 years in the making, including careful consideration by the Public Art Committee at multiple public meetings, creation of a private property license agreement, and execution of a successful pilot project. The Ascend series by Jody Rose is shown here in the slide. Analysis included review of pilot project outcomes with related updates to the draft guidelines, and generation of a list of the previously mentioned opportunity sites to focus on properties with a high level of visibility. Next slide, please. The program is designed to afford the Public Art Committee the opportunity for curation of the content and placement of murals receiving financial support from the city. By way of example, the pilot project RFP required the artist to consider each modality in the proposed design. For example, vehicular viewpoints. Next slide, please. This slide shows the intersection at Hollis and Powell Streets prior to the program. Next slide, please. And the same intersection after the public green and art installation improvements. Next slide, please. This is a viewpoint from Hollis and Stamford. Instead of a long blank wall with little to no articulation, the public now enjoys an attractive streetscape. Next slide, please. And this is an example of the bicycle and pedestrian pathway viewpoints as shown here in Pelledo Park. Next slide, please. In addition to general background regarding the creation of the program, the guidelines addresses these practical matters as shown on the slide here and discussed in more detail in the written staff report. While the Public Art Committee would be responsible for making recommendations to the City Council regarding proposed murals subject to the guidelines, the City Council would be the final decision-making body for any public art mural project. Next slide, please. The guidelines provide a process for the Public Art Committee to issue requests for proposals subject to voluntary participation of property owners and availability of funds. Next slide, please. According to the Public Art Master Plan, prioritization for art investment should be targeted to high visibility or planned corridors and note specific vehicular and pedestrian corridors. In developing the guidelines, staff walked those corridors and presented a draft list which the committee reviewed at the previously mentioned public meetings. The committee is recommending the suggested opportunity sites identified in the guidelines. Property owners of the identified sites would not be required to participate in the program. The list is merely a tool to identify areas where murals might be desirable. The guidelines also articulate terms for public notice of the mural proposals and artist compensation. Funds for the mural projects are included in the city's current capital improvement program for public art master plan projects. Next slide, please. Staff is recommending for council to adopt a resolution approving program guidelines for the public art mural program. This concludes staff's report. However, both myself and it's my understanding city staff member Amber Evans as secretary to the Public Art Committee are available for any questions you have at this time or as you discuss the item. And thank you for your time and consideration of this proposal.
Thank you. Clarifying questions? Seeing no clarifying questions, we'll take public comment on this item.
I don't see that we have any at this time.
Okay. Before we get too far into discussion, I want to just share with my colleagues the amount of work that went into this was incredible. The Public Art Committee, its subcommittee, Emmy, Amber, even Chad, hours on end of thoughtful discussion, proposals, wordsmithing. And so it was really incredibly thorough, probably one of the more thorough things I have seen done, with even the business owners coming out and sharing their thoughts on it. So I really want to thank the staff first and foremost before I throw it out there for discussion for the rest of you guys. And now that I've done that, any comments, thoughts on this? Member Bowders?
I just want to join you in thanking all the people who were involved in this very long process, making it possible. And, you know, we started in 2018 calling Emeryville the City of Art and Innovation. I think this is just in furtherance of something that we've held as a cultural identity. So I'm very supportive of the program and grateful to the Public Art Committee.
Thank you. Member Donahue?
Just for not much money, we're getting a lot of presence of, you know, visual interest in our city. I could just, you know, if you look at the before and after slides, it's very convincing what quality murals can do for a city like ours.
Excellent. Thank you. I believe I saw your hand, Member Medina.
Oh, no, I just want to echo my colleagues. I think this is really well presented, really well prepared. I don't have too many comments because, frankly, you know, I looked at the report and nothing to really pick at. This is really fantastic. I think it will improve our city aesthetically. Being not allowed to go to the gym, I've taken to jogging through the city more, and I will say that I kind of tend to have my routes naturally aligned with where we have this public art, and I think a lot of people do that unconsciously. It is one of those things we can do to improve the livability and beauty of our city in a way that does impact people's day-to-day lives. And I particularly enjoy the Palado Park one. I go past it almost every day. So thank you so much for this presentation, and I think this is a fantastic thing to do. Even in difficult times, investing in public art is a way we can give people something joyful.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues that the return on investment in our in a mural program is well worth the money. And yeah, absolutely, we're all enjoying our streets as pedestrians, as bikers, as walkers these days, because we don't have anywhere else to go. Let's love our city.
Thank you for that. I'm going to make a motion for approval in just a moment, and I'm going to come to you, Member Donahue, because you were on the Public Art Committee before me for the second. Although you,
I second that.
Well, let me get there first.
He seconds you coming to him next.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad. Yeah. I think that there's an interesting thing here. It doesn't prevent me from supporting this and appreciating all the work done. It's interesting to me. I'm always sure that I should not be the one approving what is and what is not art. I have a very particular set of tastes, and would not foist them upon the world. And then, so it coming to the City Council for a check is interesting to me, although I have faith in my colleagues that we will fully support what the Public Art Committee does. And because it is on private buildings, the private entities do have the right to say that doesn't fit with our business aesthetic. And I just want to make sure that that was made clear, that those two checks are in there, because otherwise I really fully support art being everywhere. But I tend to like more guerrilla art. So with that said, I fully move this item and go to you, Member Donahue, for a second.
I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Vote, please.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats?
Aye. And I will just say again, thank you to the staff members who helped with this. Your hard work in putting this together and working with the Public Art Committee shows how quickly we were able to approve this with minimal discussion. So incredible job, Amber, Emmy, Chad, and to all the members of the PAC. So with that, we're on to the next item, which is the RENA allocation. I guess that was redundant.
And that is mine. Sherry, can I have the PowerPoint presentation, please? So Mayor Pats and members of the City Council, earlier this evening during the study session, we briefly touched on the RHNA. This gets a little more down into the weeds and talks about really what exactly is RHNA and where does it come from, the Regional Housing Need Allocation. Next slide, please. So I'll review the RHNA itself, what it is, and how it relates to our housing element. Talk a little bit about the regional context, including SB 375 and Plan Bay Area. Then the so-called big number, the Regional Housing Needs Determination, RHND. Then how that number gets allocated among all the cities, which is the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, and the methodology that the Housing Methodology Committee came up with, their recommended methodology. Then an alternative that was developed by the Alameda County Mayor's Conference, which you heard a little bit about at a previous meeting. The ABAG Executive Board decision on all of these things, and then finally wrapping up with the next steps. Next slide, please. So the RHNA is the number of housing units that a city is expected to plan for over a particular period of time. Emeryville's RHNA for the current planning period, which is 2015 to 2023, is 1,498, which is broken down into various income levels. Every city in California is required to have a general plan, and the general plan must include a housing element, and the housing element must show the city has sufficient sites zoned to be able to meet their RHNA. Next slide, please. In 2008, the state passed SB 375, which required the California Air Resources Board to set goals for greenhouse gas emissions. Each region in the state is required to develop a land use and transportation plan, which is called a Sustainable Communities Strategy, or SCS, showing how it will meet those goals. And the region's RHNA and its regional transportation plan are required to be a part of the SCS. The Bay Area's SCS, which is prepared by ABAG and MTC, our regional planning agency, is called Plan Bay Area. The current version, which was adopted in July 2017, which is shown here, is called Plan Bay Area 2040. ABAG and MTC are currently preparing the next SCS, which will be called Plan Bay Area 2050 and will be adopted next year. Updating the RHNA is an important part of the Plan Bay Area 2050 process. Next slide, please. So this begins with the big number that comes from the state called the Regional Housing Needs Determination. This comes from the State Department of Housing and Community Development with data that they get from the State Department of Finance and do some massaging to with various requirements of state law. In June, HCD told ABAG what the RHND for the Bay Area will be for the next planning period of 2023 to 2031. As you can see, it's 135% higher than the previous RHNA, or our current RHND, which is 188,000 approximately for the entire Bay Area. And the new one will be a little over 440,000. Again, it's broken down into the various income categories. So when people say that there's a need for more housing, this really drives that home. The need has been determined by the state to be more than double what it has been during the current planning cycle. Next slide, please. Now, this could be allocated simply by using the current RHNAs and just increasing them all by 135%. If we were to do that for Emeryville, this is what our RHNA will be approximately for the next planning cycle. Currently 1,498 at the various income levels, and that would go up to about 3,500. However, that isn't what happened. Next slide, please. So the way the process played out our estimated RENA for the next planning period is actually about the same as for the previous planning period, 1489 as opposed to 1498. As you can see, the various income categories have been altered a little bit. Very low would have 100 more, and above moderate would have about 100 less. Moderate and low would be about the same. So this is the estimated RENA based on the methodology that's been recommended. Next slide, please. So where did that recommendation come from? Well, in order to help ABAG and MTC allocate the RHND among the 100 cities and 9 counties of the Bay Area, they established a Housing Methodology Committee, or an HMC, which includes representatives from all the counties in the Bay Area. Alameda County has 3 representatives on the on the HMC, and the planning directors of Alameda County have gotten monthly updates from our representatives. The HMC met for a year from October 2019 to September 2020, and they issued their final report last month in October 2020. This is what that report looks like, and it is attached to your staff report as attachment 1. So if you want to dive into it and get into all the details, it is there for your pleasure. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes what the recommended methodology is. And I just want to say at the outset that I have a kind of a high level understanding of this. I can't really explain all the details of how this worked. I did ask ABAG and MTC if they could send somebody to this meeting tonight to answer any questions you may have. And I was told that due to their staffing resource limitations, that they are not able to send representatives to the City Council and Board of Supervisor meetings of all 109 jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And so therefore they aren't sending people to any of them because they don't want to play favorites. However, they do have resources available on their website, and they have their own various meetings and webinars that you are certainly welcome to take advantage of. But just to try to explain this, the way the methodology works is it starts with a baseline allocation to all the cities in the Bay Area. I know that baseline is shown here towards the bottom of this chart, but it actually is the starting point, and then it gets modified. The baseline, what is chosen as the baseline, is important because it has implications for how the numbers end up working out. And what the HMC decided was to use the share of households in the year 2050 for each jurisdiction as compared to the total Bay Area as the baseline. So for example, Emeryville's baseline allocation would be 0.4% of all of the households in the Bay Area. So that's the starting point. They then adjust that with a number of weights and factors that are illustrated here. And they divide the different income categories into 2 groups. One is very low and low, and the other is moderate and above moderate. The factors that they use include access to high opportunity areas, job proximity by auto, and job proximity by transit. And then they apply different weights to those factors depending on if it's the very, very low and low group or the moderate and above moderate group. Then they run all those numbers, they adjust the baseline for each jurisdiction accordingly, and that results in an allocation for each jurisdiction for very low and low income units and for moderate and above moderate units. And you add those all together and you get the RENA allocation for each jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So let me just say that it should be emphasized that the HMC recommendation is for a methodology, not exact numbers for each jurisdiction. The numbers will be finalized after the Planned Bay Area 2050 projections are finalized, which is expected in January. Nonetheless, the HMC report does include approximate RENA numbers for each jurisdiction that would be expected to result from the recommended methodology. And this slide is a rather stylized map. I think it's kind of nifty how they somehow managed to fit the entire Bay Area, all of its cities, into these little hexagons. So this shows the total anticipated RENA for each jurisdiction. As you can see, Emeryville's there is 1.4K, which is about 1,500. Of course, the big cities, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose would have the biggest numbers. And then some of the cities down in Santa Clara Valley, Santa Clara County would also have fairly large numbers. Next slide, please. This is a similar map, but it shows the growth rate that would be expected through the 2023 to 2031 planning period, starting from the 2019 household number of households for each jurisdiction. Emeryville, you can see, would be expected growth of about 23%, which would be the highest growth rate in the East Bay. However, that would be consistent with our average annual growth rate since about the 1970s. So there's nothing too out of whack there. Most of the growth would be in the South Bay and the Peninsula, and there'd be very little growth in the far north and East Bay, and moderate growth everywhere else. Next slide, please. Now, looking at just the cities in Alameda County and comparing the current RHNA, it's called the fifth cycle, 2015 to 2023, to that resulting from the HMC's recommended methodology for the sixth cycle, which is 2023 to 2031. This slide shows that comparison where the blue is the current RHNA and the orange is the RHNA that would result from the HMC methodology. As you can see, Emeryville would be almost identical to what it is today. Every other city in Alameda would increase their RHNA under the HMC methodology. This shows the absolute numbers, and obviously Oakland and Fremont and Berkeley, the bigger cities, would have the bigger numbers. But if you look at the actual proportion of the increase, next slide, please. This shows the percent increase in the RHNA for each jurisdiction. Emeryville has -1%, so ours actually goes down slightly. Other cities have varying amounts of increase. Any increase over 100% would represent more than a doubling of their current RHNA. And over 135% would be above the regional RHND average. Piedmont's proportional increase would be the greatest at about 900% because they would be going from 60 to 600. Needless to say, the other cities in Alameda County are not real happy about this result. Next slide, please. So the Alameda County Mayor's Conference did their own number crunching, and they came up with an alternative methodology that used a different baseline as well as modified weights and factors. And that, by the way, is attachment 2 to your staff report if you want to get into the details of how they did this and what the weights and factors and baseline were. This chart illustrates what the mayor's recommended alternative methodology would result in as compared with the HMC methodology. As you can see, Emeryville's would go way up. Oakland would also go up a bit, and some other cities would go up a little bit, but most cities' RHNAs would go down with the mayor's conference recommendation. Next slide, please. And this shows the proportionate, the percent change between the mayor's conference recommendation and the HMC recommended methodology. Emeryville, of course, is a real outlier here. Our increase for the mayor's recommendation would be 146%. Most other cities would go down. Dublin, Newark, and Oakland would all go up a bit. Livermore is about flat, and the other cities in the county would go down. Needless to say, the most Alameda County mayors supported this alternative methodology, and on October 14th, the mayors voted to recommend it to the ABAG Executive Board, and Mayor Pats, as he previously reported to you, voted no on this recommendation. Next slide, please. On October 15th, the following day, the ABAG Executive Board held a very lengthy meeting, and they rejected the Alameda County Mayor's alternative methodology, and they voted 23-10 to approve the HMC recommendation, which will result in a RHNA for Emeryville that is about the same as the current RHNA. That then started a public comment period, which will go through November 27th, and during that period, there will be a public hearing at the ABAG Regional Planning Committee on November 12th. Then in January, the draft methodology will hopefully be approved. It will be sent to HCD for their review. It can't be used by ABAG and MTC until HCD approves it. And then in the spring, the final methodology and the draft RENA, final methodology would be approved and the draft RENA is expected to be released. That's when we first get to see what our real numbers are proposed to be. Then that will be followed by an appeal period and hearings during next summer of 2021. And finally, at the end of next year, the final RENA will be published and the executive board is expected to approve it. So that's when we really know what our RENA numbers are for the next planning cycle. We then have a little over a year to prepare our next housing element using our new RENA, and that is due to HCD in January of 2023. Next slide, please. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to attempt to respond to any questions you may have, and I'd be interested to hear your comments and direction.
Thank you. Really quickly, because I think the mayor's conference letter was worded in a very particular way. My vote for no, while my personal vote would have been against their model, was more a vote in support of Mayor Schaaf's proposal that each city send their own letter of recommendation for methodology and the mayors not take a position as a collective because each city's needs are so vastly different. And I fully supported that. I even seconded her motion. What passed was the substitute motion on which I voted no. So I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think that was captured there. And now I'll go to clarifying questions on this. Remember?
Mayor Pat, thank you so much for representing us at that mayor's conference. My clarifying question is actually for you. Could you give us a brief summary of the logic behind the Alameda Mayor's Conference suggested alternative calculations?
You used a word in there that has a very specific meaning to me.
Oh, sorry, logic.
And so rationale?
Rationale.
Yeah, it had to do with it had to do with cars in the corridor, you know, and feeling like we've got transit, they don't, and they don't want transit. So it really, and really, the Southern County should do it. You know, Santa Clara County should build more. And city manager, I think I'm putting my bias on this. I'm not a fan of some of the mayors. I even was really mad at some of my favorite mayors there because I do not approve of abstaining. Like an abstention is you do not have enough information, or maybe you have, but to abstain just is a cop out to me. And again, I love some of the mayors who abstained, but I found that to be a real cop out. So I'll go to the city manager. Maybe she can express some of the better rationale with less bias.
Would love for that. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor is correct. There was the basis for the presentation had in large part to do with the perception that the job creation is predominantly happening in Santa Clara County, and that Santa Clara County is not going to be required to accommodate a sufficient number of units to offset its job creation, and is essentially externalizing the impacts of its job creation onto its sister counties. That was a stated rationale. At least one member also indicated that their small city didn't have any room to build and therefore shouldn't have an allocation of units to it.
Was it because the mansions were too large?
My favorite city every time we get to ABAG and RENA is Piedmont. I love Piedmont.
Okay.
So there were.
I'm trying to figure out why Emeryville got doubled in this rationale. Like, why did they double Emeryville?
It was a way the methodology was recrafted to spread the units away, you know, just to respread the units. But again, the basis for the rationale had in large part to do with the perceived externalization of the impacts of Santa Clara County.
And I'm going to say this, Member Medina, based on no facts at all, but it's contrary to the narrative out there. It's because Emeryville are job creators, and therefore we need to take care of the housing need. So, you know, with that, I'm going to go. Member Bowders, you have a clarifying question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do for Charlie. One question, you had a slide up that had like all the next steps. So the HMC approved the draft allocation formula. It looks like that was the day after the mayor went to the mayor's conference meeting. And then I saw there was a public hearing held on November 12th, and the comment period is to November 17th. And then there's this, after the comment period and the response, then it looks like there's this like approval. Who is approving of it, and what's the chance that it's not what has been approved by the executive committee?
I believe it is the executive committee that has to approve it.
So they just vote again to after comments and response to comments about whether they're affirming it, and they send it to HCD.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
Okay. My only other question is, in your experience in your years of doing housing elements, since we're on cycle 6, has ABAG ever, the executive committee, ever sent something out for public comment, and then after it came back, changed its mind and did something totally different?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I don't believe that any RENA appeal has ever been successful.
That was all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Great. Any other clarifying questions before I throw it to public comment? Member Martinez?
Yeah, just Charlie, I was just wondering if you had anything to report back on that November 12th public hearing.
I did not attend that, so I can report back later, but I can't report back tonight. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I'd just love to hear how that went.
Okay.
I can tell you though that I did listen to a lot of the tape of the or the video, the Zoom recording of the executive committee meeting, and it went on and on and on. There were lots of speakers.
All right. I see a hand raised for public comment, so let's go ahead and take that. And then if you have any speaker cards.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yes. So I would like to, first off, Charlie failed to mention that each RENA implementation period does not reflect any overage that any municipality might have done vis-a-vis the previous RENA implementation period. So Emeryville is famous for always more than meeting our RENA numbers. And one implementation period, we were over by like, I think over 500%. But being over by 100% of our RENA allocation numbers is very common. But the point is, I'm trying to make is that we are never credited with having built more than we were supposed to, or than we were the minimum RENA requirement with the next RENA implementation period. We're starting again from zero. So Emeryville has been overbuilding vis-a-vis RENA for a generation, and we've never gotten any credit for that. So, you know, when you're talking with these other municipalities, you should bring that up, because we need to get credit for that, because we need to have this be based on, measurability. That should be measurable. And the fact that we have done more than our share in Emeryville should be acknowledged. So it should be known that these RENA implementation periods are not reflective of the previous iteration. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that I would like to hear some discussion here with regard to this Plan Bay Area of 2050 and the RENA numbers vis-a-vis SB 330, because that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. That's going to make it, all this is null and void from what I understand. And I would like to hear you guys do some discussion about SB 330 and how it affects the future RENA numbers. Thank you.
Any other public comment this evening?
I don't have any speaker cards now.
Okay. Anybody like to start the discussion on this? Member Bowders and then Member Medina.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I just wanted to give Charlie the chance to respond to the public comment. We had a slideshow in the study session this evening where we were provided with kind of like what we had accomplished, or maybe it was in this, actually maybe it was in this staff report. I read so many of them, where we were at with RENA. And my understanding is in the current cycle, we haven't met our RENA obligation in any of the 4 categories. Is that correct, Charlie?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, so we're still, I guess the concern that we've met our obligation, and maybe the speaker was speaking from a prior cycle I'm not familiar with, but the current 8-year cycle, we have not met our obligation in any category. That includes above market rate or above. So I just want to flag that for the public as a policy item. But beyond that, I want to thank the mayor for his vote at the mayor's conference. It's never easy to be the person who looks like they're voting against all their colleagues, but the reality is that whatever the formula was, whatever voodoo math people did, it was quite comical to me to see everybody essentially across the board have these reductions from the math, and that Emeryville will just dump it on Emeryville because they like housing. So I want to thank you for doing that. It's not easy to be the lone no vote at a mayor's meeting. I know that. I've done that once, so I get that. But I appreciate you for doing that, and this is consistent with how we're building, and I think we're in a better place because we're going to have the Measure C expenditure plan coming up, in next month, and we've got a couple projects on the table to give funding to and to get off the ground, and that's just really going to get us. It may make it into this cycle, I realize, because the permits may go in this cycle. It just kind of depends on timing. But in any event, I think Emeryville is really well positioned with some of the other decisions we've made to do good work in the next cycle on RENA, and I want to thank the staff for being part of that solution.
Member Medina, before I come to you, I do want to say Mayor Schaaf came out very strongly in support of the original numbers, and had she not had a familial obligation, that I think she would have also been a strong voice. I'm more disappointed in the abstentions because they, I think, shared our view, but chose not to speak out. And I think we have learned over the last 4 years, you have to speak out. Silence is not acceptable, or the last 50 years, however many far back you want to go. Member Medina, your comments? So thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Charlie, for the presentation, and to our mayor for representing us at mayor's conference in a difficult conversation. I have attended the ABAG meetings as our delegate there. I think the first one was in February, and the second was in June, and the second one was after the RENA numbers were released, and there was a tsunami of public comment, which I think Mr. Bryant also caught some of on the last meeting. And I want to represent that, contrary to the mayor's conference opinion, a lot of the public comment that I heard, the vast majority of actually, was that these RENA numbers are simply too low for the state of the housing crisis in California, which is a perspective that I tend to agree with. And so I think this allocation makes sense. I understand where it's coming from. We can always push to do better. I also would like to ask staff, there are some excellent charts, maps from ABAG, and they had said that their staff was going to be very on hand to help with these presentations, by the way. So I find it kind of galling that they said, no, we won't go to your meeting. So they had some fantastic maps that were showing you can't reuse these sites. So here's all the sites that have been used and all the ones that can't be reused. And they had these great ones per city. I would like to get that information next time we review this or when it comes back. And also I think that I'm going to complain at ABAG about the lack of support for our staff in doing this, because it was publicly committed to in February. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. Member Donahue.
I just want to ask Charlie a couple of questions about, with our upcoming housing that's been permitted and the changeover being 2023, are we about on schedule to meet our RENA requirements? And then the other question I have is, I understand the lever for the new state mandates for building housing, but what happens to cities who do not meet their RENA requirements?
Concerning meeting the current RENA, I haven't really tracked that to see how close we're going to get to meeting it, but I would just say as a general statement, and this is partly in response to the speaker comment, I'm not aware that Emeryville has ever exceeded its total RENA in any previous cycle. I think that's probably true in many, if not most, previous cycles as far as market rate housing is concerned. We generally do meet or exceed our market rate housing RHNA numbers, but for the lower income categories, we typically do not meet those numbers. Most cities do not meet those numbers. So I would say for the current RHNA cycle, we will most likely meet our, we may even meet the total RHNA number if you don't look at the income breakdown, but I don't think we're going to meet all of the various lower income categories. In terms of cities that don't meet their RHNA, well, I mean, there's no particular penalty. It's just that, well, first of all, you have to show in your housing element that you have sites zoned adequately to meet your RHNA, that it would be possible to meet your RHNA. And if you don't do that, then you can't get your housing element certified, which, you know, puts you in jeopardy of not getting various state funding and so forth. But to a certain extent, it's dependent on the private market and what the private market decides to build. And we have some influence over that. But, you know, that's why we typically meet or exceed the market rate categories, but not the lower income categories. SB 35, which mandates the ministerial approvals of projects that have a certain amount of lower income units in them. There are provisions of that apply to cities that have not met certain levels of their RHNA obligations. If you haven't met any obligations at all, the provisions of SB 35 are more stringent than if you've met some but not all. And I believe Emeryville falls in the category of having met some but not all of the RHNA. So we are kind of in the middle tier on SB 35. If you've totally met all of your RHNA, which very few cities have, I believe SB 35 doesn't apply to you at all, but that's a very rare situation.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Vice Mayor, I think you're the last we've heard from.
Ma'am, I actually have a question for our city attorney. Are there no federal mandates to comply with these allocations? Because I know, like in the early 80s, there were cities in New York State that got federal court orders, to Yonkers specifically, to build affordable housing when all of the NIMBYs gathered and said, no, do not allow these people to live in our neighborhoods.
I don't know if there's any federal like sort of a federal component to RHNA. I don't know, but I see that Councilmember Bowers might have some information.
Yeah, so I think that what the Vice Mayor is referring to is the federal affirmatively furthering fair housing laws. And so Westchester County, New York, and Marin County, California are the only two counties in U.S. history to be subjected to HUD's enforcement rules. HUD actually has police powers related to communities that do not take action or otherwise undermine federal law around furthering fair housing. And in those particular examples, there are different fact patterns. But in Yonkers and Westchester County, New York, that was related to actually basically, in short, coming up with local rules that would preclude the development of affordable housing, which had the almost exactly direct effect of basically modern day redlining their community so that lower income Black and brown families could not live in the county. And multiple administrative attempts to rectify that situation failed, resulting in them using the rarely used police power HUD has to actually compel and get what are called a VCA, a voluntary compliance agreement, out of the county to take steps to do that. And they go under a monitoring plan. Marin County is the only other county in the United States that has been subjected to that. And I believe their voluntary compliance agreement expired a couple years ago.
Thank you. That explained way more than the 6-part HBO series, Show Me a Hero. Which
well, I used to do that. I used to do that litigation for a living. It's the only reason I know.
No, I appreciate that. And that's the exact answer that I was looking for. At the same time, I just want to acknowledge that, you know, we need to accommodate more housing. We need to put more housing in the pipeline. We need to be prepared for the fact that when we do our next housing element and when we revisit our general plan, that we are going to have to consider upzoning in parts of this city. So that's just a reality that we face, and we need to do our part. And I look forward to seeing what comes, and I'm happy to have this preview, and thank you for the report, Charlie.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I do appreciate that. I'm glad the election did not turn on protecting the suburbs. So that's all I could think of during that discussion, Member Bowders and Vice Mayor. Coming back around, Charlie, excellent job on this. I think you did a better job explaining where the mayors stood than the mayors did themselves and made this accessible. And just to put a positive spin on this, if anybody says we have built too much housing, we can always fall back on the Alameda County mayors think we haven't built enough. And so that's a good authority to build more. With that, I will move on to the next item because that fell completely flat. We'll go to department head reports.
I don't believe we have any this evening, Mr. Mayor.
I'm shocked based on an earlier conversation that we have none. Okay, we now come to the future agenda items. Member Bowders?
I just can't remember. I can't remember if we did this or not, so humor me if we did it already. Discussion about naming the Amtrak train station.
It does not sound familiar.
Councilmember, the Commission on Aging, I think, is considering some naming or some recognition opportunities, but that has not been agendized by council for its discussion.
Okay, there was a request from the owner of the train station in terms of identifying a potential place in the city that might recognize former Councilmember Davis. For her many years of service, it was recommended that if the city would like to identify a spot and use a public facility that's privately owned kind of property, that the train station might be an identified place. And so I don't know if I can ask that we refer this to the Commission on Aging if they're taking this up, or if this is something I could just put before the council, but I would like to recommend that we have at least move forward with some discussion about that as a site.
I believe we have a Commission on Aging meeting tomorrow, and I can certainly communicate that that is one of the possibilities that they should consider.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other future agenda items? All right, seeing none, before I adjourn, I just want to acknowledge where we are at this time of year and in the world. And this is my final, I think, full meeting. So I'm going to take full advantage of my seat of power, as I have done all year. And that is, my favorite holiday is soon. And I think I've had talked with Member Bowders. I think it's his favorite holiday as well. I don't know how the rest of you feel about it, but Thanksgiving is very meaningful to me. I've had a very open door policy and large groups at my house. And my mother's birthday happens to align with Christmas, which is another special occasion. And I have not seen my mother since her previous birthday because of the lockdown. And I just want to say, don't do it. I know we miss our family, we miss our friends, we miss our strangers, but stay safe this holiday season. I have canceled my plans to travel to Southern California to see my family. I have scaled back my open door policy on Thanksgiving and moved it outside so I can see the few family members who are local to me and not actually related to me. But and I encourage you to do the same. Do not try to overthink it and do masks indoors. Please keep yourselves safe. Please keep the community safe. These are going to be difficult times, but appreciate the holidays. I have scheduled many Zoom calls with various family members to connect and friends. So please do the same. I am saddened by this because I love Thanksgiving, and I'm worried they're going to cancel the Super Bowl, the only holiday more sacred to me than Thanksgiving. So with that, I wish you all well. I wish you a happy and joyous Thanksgiving, and I'll see you guys in December.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
8:49, the meeting is adjourned.
Good night,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye-bye.